We're going to talk about what has happened in Ukraine on this day of the Russian invasion. We'll examine the actions and the strategies, both military and political. Now, if this is your first time watching, my name is Darren Gertis. I'm a professor who's built multiple leadership programs at Charleston Southern University. So we'll also view these events through the lens of leadership. And I also wrote a book about Zelensky called I Need Ammunition, Not a Ride, and you can find it on Amazon. Okay, it is day 108. Russia has been making slow, measurable progress. The New York Times reported that the war has, quote, seemingly begun to turn, with Russia now picking off regional targets. Ukraine lacking the weaponry it needs and Western support for the war effort fraying in the face of rising gas prices and galloping inflation. So it, it I a long time is good in one sense because you're wearing Russia down, but it's bad because if you lose your Western partners, that's going to be very dangerous. So there's kind of a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. According to the UK Ministry of Defense, Russian forces around Severodonetsk have not made advances into the south of the city. Intense street fighting is going on door to door, so that they're kind of in a holding pattern. Now, that being said, the Russians have begun to coordinate artillery and air, and they are more lethal than they have ever been. Part of the problem that the Russians have had is that they've not really been good in combat, collective arms, infantry supported by tanks, supported by artillery, supported by air support, and they have because they've focused in a narrow region in the Donbass. They've now been able to do this more effectively. The Ukrainians still continue to hold their ground. So to provide a sense of what's going on in Severodonetsk, I saw this other article in The Guardian. I was talking about what happened in Mariupol, because Mariupol is now suffering a potential cholera crisis, which is amazing. But that's because, and this is from The Guardian's report, quote, Russia has demolished 1,300 high rise buildings in the city of Mariupol without removing the dead bodies. And so now it's leaking into the water and all kinds of other things. But I read that because it's important to understand demolishing 1,300 high rise buildings. I mean, what kind of destruction is Russia wreaking on Ukraine? So, I've been to former Soviet Union countries. I've been to Lithuania and Bulgaria, Romania, Belarus, and I've seen this ugly Soviet architecture. Mercifully, it's once it's gone, you have to rebuild it, and it'll sprout up anew, like London after the Blitz. But then so much for the ugly buildings. But it's terrible that all this destruction, costing billions and billions of dollars, has been wreaked on the city, and that's what they're doing to Severodonetsk right now. Zelensky spoke of the situation in his first speech of the day. He said this, quote, very fierce fighting continues in Donbas. And then I'm going to skip down a little bit. He said, quote, Russia wants to destroy every city in Donbas. Every is not an exaggeration. And I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right. I think Russia just wants to roll over it, and they're either going to destroy it or they're going to make it theirs. But either way, it's not going to be what it is now. And I think that's very sad. Okay, the New York Times also reported that Russia has been, quote, making headway in establishing control in the towns it had captured. And they said it is set out to convince and coerce the remaining population that its future lies in what Mr. Putin views as his restored empire. Now, that was quite a phrase, because just a few days ago, Putin was talking about Peter the Great, celebrating Peter the Great's 350th anniversary. And he said some menacing kind of phrases about how, Peter the Great restored his empire. Maybe it's fallen on me to do the same. So that's a little scary. They are Russifying the occupied territories. That is, they're moving toward referendums in the fall, which will hardly be legal or fair. And when I say restored the empire, um, the land where Ukraine is on the map is essentially an area that was once called Novorossiya. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it translates to New Russia. And it's that area, that landmass that's roughly Ukraine. And it was captured by Catherine the Great in 1764, part of the Russian Empire, until the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917. Now that became the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Empire, and in between years from 1918 to 21, something like that, Ukraine was free. It was its own independent country. Then it was absorbed into the Soviet Union by force, and then when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it was free again and has been free for another 30 years. So the real question is, has Putin's return to strengthen the empire, which means to recapture Ukraine. And I think that's very much what is in Putin's mind. Okay, at Shangri-La Dialogue, the Asian Security Summit, Zelensky spoke and he said, quote, Russia wants to make it impossible for a neighboring country, which it sees as solely its colony, to be able to exist freely, to exist independently. And I think that is right. The Russians actually, the term for Ukraine actually means something like the outer lands, but they also see them as little Russians. It's almost somewhat similar to like America's view of Canada, except we're not just trying to devastate them. We're like, oh yeah, they're up there, they're friendly, whatever. They're kind of like us, um, and but so there's a kinship of some sort, but it's not the same. It's like no, these are our, they're under our thumb, and it's a very different perspective. In light of Putin's rhetoric about Peter the Great, though, this isn't hyperbole. This is actually something that's kind of scary. He talked about international law and he said this quote, Russia propaganda is trying hard to spread in your countries as in many others. This disinformation thesis that Russia's war against Ukraine is allegedly something about NATO, about the role of America, about the West's attempt to advance somewhere in Europe. But Russia's war against Ukraine is far from just about Europe. It's about globally important things. The Russian leadership wants to reject all the achievements of human history, including the system of international law that we have today, and return to life in the 19th century. Okay, so it's not exactly that. I mean, I get what he's saying. He is overthrowing international law, but that's because he wants Russia to become this great empire that becomes a bipolar world, as it was with the Americans and the Soviets. He actually wants to move that way. They do want to overturn international law, and they don't care that they're violating international law. Go back an episode or two and you'll see all the laws that have been violated by Russia since this has taken place. Okay, I've said my piece. I'm out of time. Come back for day 109 tomorrow. Hey, if this video was helpful, hit like to help others find it in YouTube's algorithm. Subscribe so that you can stay informed. And one more thing, if you are moved to contribute to the humanitarian aid for Ukraine, I have a link below for Samaritan's Purse. If you want to give, be sure to give only to reputable organizations. There's a lot of scammers out there. Thanks for your time.